If you believe the surveys, American voters are more disenchanted with major political parties, but they're also concerned about close elections being decided by spoilers or winners getting much less than half the vote. One potential remedy is ranked choice voting, and a referendum for adopting that in Massachusetts will be on the ballot in this year's final election. To make the case for a yes vote is the CEO and chair of the board for Voter Choice 2020, Evan Falchuk. Thank you very much for being with us, Evan.
Yeah, Chris, good to be with you. And so, I'm the chair of the board, but we have an awesome CEO, Tara Brown McCormick, who ran the successful Maine campaign to implement ranked choice voting.
I want to ask you about exactly how this would work and which elections it would be used in.
So it'll be used in all statewide elections. So governor, all the constitutional offices, senator, the congressional races, and then in all the state legislative races in the state. So it'll apply to most of our elections here in Massachusetts.
So what would it work like? Let's say you've got maybe half a dozen candidates in a primary for an open seat. What could a voter do about that?
So what you'd be able to do is rank those candidates in the order in which you like them. So you'd put your first choice first, second choice second, and so on. And when the votes are counted, the goal is to make sure that the winner has a majority. So if in the first counting, no one has a majority, you take the last place finisher, and that candidate is now eliminated. And everyone who voted for that last place finisher, their second choice now counts. Then we count again. And if still no one has 50%, then we do the same process until someone ends up with 50% of the vote. And when you do it this way, you ensure that the candidates have the broadest amount of support across the district. As a simple example, the 4th Congressional District, just outside of Boston, recently, the primary had 9 really good candidates, and the winner won with 22% of the vote. In a ranked choice environment, we would know who the majority of voters liked, and unfortunately, we don't get to do that in our current system.
It's interesting also that you were in a race where you were, I guess, what we might call a third-party candidate. It was a fairly close election, and could ranked choice voting have changed that in some way?
It would have changed it in a lot of ways. So when I ran for governor back in 2014 as an independent, neither Baker nor Coakley got a majority of the votes when they were finally counted. So there would have been a difference in terms of the mechanics of the election. But I'll tell you what really would have mattered is that when I ran, if I went to knock on doors and I saw a sign for Baker or Coakley outside someone's house, I wouldn't go knock on that door. In a ranked choice election, I would go knock on that door and see if I could convince that voter to be my second choice. The same thing, if I were a Baker or Coakley canvasser, I would go in front of houses that had my sign in front of them. And we would find ways to agree with each other as opposed to finding ways to disagree with each other. And we need that more than ever these days.
What about the voters? What if you have a voter who says, I don't want this complexity. I'm only coming here to vote for one person in one race. So can I still do that?
You can. You can just vote for one. You can rank them any way you want, but if you want to vote for one, you're free to do so.
Well, in some of the debates around this already, we're hearing, well, this is too complex, it's going to depress voter turnout, and you might even have people voting for candidates and finding later on that their vote didn't really get counted. So what about those arguments?
So there's study after study that show that this is actually easy and fair, and voters like it. It's been used in different ways for over 100 years in different parts of the world. It's been used here in Massachusetts. Cambridge has had a form of ranked choice voting for almost that long. And voters like it. And I'll say that, the arguments that people make that say that voters aren't capable of doing this, they're underestimating Massachusetts voters. I mean, voters here are smart, they're sophisticated, they know who the candidates are. They have opinions about what the candidates ought to be saying, and they're more than capable of ranking them. And look, Maine has had this since 2016. They ran an election for Congress in 2018 very successfully with it, in which huge percentages of Maine voters said that they liked it and they thought it was simple and fair. And no offense to people in Maine, but if they could do it in Maine, we can do it here.
I want you to think about this in terms of the national election. And I know this would not apply to a vote for president, but what we're all confronted with nationally right now is we have two major candidates, and to some degree, and probably not exactly the same in each case, they're appealing to some pretty extreme viewpoints in their bases. How would that kind of phenomenon be changed by ranked choice voting?
Yeah, this notion of you got to go after your base voters is classic of how our current system works. You know, your goal as a candidate is to excite your base, depress the other side's base. And it means that the large majority of voters are left out of the conversation and feel like they're stuck without any good choices. So they end up voting for, you know, the person they dislike the least. In a ranked choice election, you've got to reach out to the broad swath of voters. It's not enough to have a base. It's nice to have a base, but it sure isn't enough. And ranked choice voting totally changes that dynamic.
Oh, I want to go to another possibility here because we also have these races where entrenched incumbents sometimes are opposed by a whole horde of challengers, and they end up winning with less than 40% of the vote sometimes. Could that also be changed by ranked choice voting?
Absolutely. You know, what happens so much now when a lot of people run is that there's all this pressure on people to drop out because you're going to split the vote. You're going to make it so that the incumbent wins. You're going to take up the lane for, you know, you see this a lot like in the mayor's race in Boston back in 2013, where the minority candidates were being pressured to drop out. It changes that. And it's a needed upgrade in that process.
Evan, I know this option is being presented as nonpartisan, even impartial, but one of the things I've noticed is that on the one side, there are some big financial supporters here who just happen to be supporting leading Democratic candidates. And I also noticed that the opposition, a lot of it's coming out of conservative libertarian think tanks. So, I mean, is this really all that impartial?
We've got support from all across the political spectrum. So Republicans like, or former Republicans like Bill Weld, Lieutenant Governor Kerry Healy, um, the former head of the state Republican Party, and then across on the Democratic side, people like former Governor Deval Patrick, um, Ed Markey, Joe Kennedy, all across the political spectrum, we're seeing support for this. So, you know, this has been an incredible grassroots movement. I've been involved in it since 2017. It was already getting started before then. We've got thousands of volunteers across the Commonwealth and all across the political spectrum. I mean, you mentioned libertarians. We have a lot of support from libertarians, as well as Green Party and other folks who are just independent voters. It's a common sense reform that is nonpartisan because all it does is elevate the voice of the people. And I think that's something that we should want in a time when people are hungry to have those choices and a greater voice and to see more consensus among our political leaders.
I imagine a proposal like this, if it were to be adopted, would also change the channels of campaign contributions. How would you see that going?
Well, people would have more choices. So if you had a race where there were 3, 4, 5 candidates running, and it wasn't just the Democrat and the Republican, there's an opportunity for new ideas to come to the fore. And we've seen in other places where they've used ranked choice voting that the winner of the race isn't necessarily the one who has the biggest pocketbook, which is how it works today, unfortunately. Instead, it's the people with the best ideas. And that's the way our politics ought to work. You know, among our endorsers here in Massachusetts are people like Senator Warren and Attorney General Maura Healey. And these are people that have worked really hard on this issue of money in politics. And, you know, the fact that they've endorsed this and are such enthusiastic supporters tells us a lot about what this is going to mean for our democracy.
I know there could be some more legal challenges down the road as well here. I'm thinking of these new or small parties. They would still have a platform. They would still influence the outcome in some way, but they might be deprived of the old-fashioned spoiler effect. I'm sure they're going to say that's part of what free speech is all about in this country. What would you say in response?
Well, the spoiler effect is taken away. It's no longer possible to be a spoiler because you can't take votes from one candidate. People, though, on the other side of it can say, I really like that candidate. I want to vote for him as my first choice. So, for example, when I ran for governor back in 2014, there were people that said, you're a spoiler. You know, I can't vote for you because it might change the outcome. Or they said, I like you, but you can't win, so I don't want to vote for you. Well, in a ranked choice election, you can do that. And it's really, again, a needed upgrade that's simple and fair that fixes that problem.
Well, thank you very much. I should mention that if people want to get any more information about this option and your organization, how can they find that?
So they can go to yesontorcv.com. There is a ton of information on that website. We want everyone to know exactly how ranked choice voting works, what it's about, why they should support it, and we want them to tell their friends, coworkers, colleagues, family, everybody, get out and vote yes on 2.
Thank you very much for taking the time to join us.
You bet, Chris.
Evan Falchuk from Voter Choice 2020. We'll have more news in just a moment.